Welcome to this debate. It's a chance to let off some steam after the ideas and opinions you have been utterly bombarded with over the past 2 days. We're following fairly standard debating rules this afternoon. The really important thing is for people from the floor to get a chance to say what they think as well as the panel. So the procedure goes like this. I'll introduce the debate teams one by one. Each one of them will then support or oppose the motion, and then it's open to you on the floor. We have fairly strict time limits in order to air as many views as possible. You in the audience have only got 2 minutes, or less if you want it, to get your ideas over. It would help enormously if when the floor debate starts, people who want to participate go to the microphones which are in the aisles, the 2 aisles in the middle there. And if you're in front of the microphone and want to go up there, go round rather than go up the aisle, because otherwise you'll get in the way of the cameras and you'll block the view of the people you're opposing or supporting, and that is rather important. And I want you to go congregate on the side of the argument you want to speak on. So pros on your left side, pros on your left side, and no, wait a minute, pros on your, yes, that's right, pros on your left-hand side here and cons there. Then we can alternate the argument elegantly. The BBC drills the principle of balance into absolutely everybody it employs. At the end, there'll be a chance for each side up here to sum up, and the subject of the debate is a simple proposition. The leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, and demanding. And it doesn't just mean you, the leaders of tomorrow, gathered here in St. Gallen. It means the new generation that's going to lead the whole world fairly soon. Now, before we start, I want to know how you feel about that proposition before you have heard of the debate. So can you use this, this instant voting device, please? I think you know how to do it. It tells you on the screen. Young people are selfish, etc., etc., or oppose it. And I'll give you the results in a minute. And then we'll see how that changes after the debate, which we will now start. First up for the proposition is Theodore Dalrymple. He's a retired British psychiatrist and prison doctor who's now Dietrich Weismann Fellow at the Manhattan Institute in New York, which makes him a leader of today. He's known for Theodore Dalrymple's plain-spoken views expressed over the years in many newspaper and magazine articles, and one of his books under that name is Spoilt Rotten, The Toxic Cult of Sentimentality. Theodore Dalrymple has 6 minutes to speak in favor of the idea that the leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, and demanding.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, first I should like to thank the St. Gallen Foundation, and despite the motion, to thank specifically the students who've done a most magnificent job in St. Gallen and made this symposium so successful. And I'm also grateful, particularly grateful, because this is the first time in my life I've ever been called a leader. And I'm not sure I really want to be a leader. And I certainly don't want any followers. And I'm not sure, I don't mind being led, but I'm not sure I want to be led by people who want to be leaders. Now, the first thing I want to make clear is that when one generalizes, one does not mean that every last member of a group shares a characteristic. We should use words precisely, but not more precisely than we can use them. And the second is that I'm not, as I approach old age, I'm not seeking to lay blame on the younger generation, as old men have always done, although I might do it after a couple of glasses of wine this evening. So I don't intend to lay any blame. And finally, by leaders, I mean leaders in many different fields of endeavor, not just political or but economic and artistic, in the medium in particular. And perhaps I've been asked because we in Britain are the world leaders in shallow leadership. In fact, leaders are also followers, and they're not immune from the general developments in society around them. For example, we live in an information age, it is said, but this information age doesn't necessarily increase our outlook, the width of our outlook. It can actually lead to a self-obsession. And there are, for example, in the United States, children are now spending 7.5 hours a day in front of screens, and newspaper sales are down, and they are not being, this is not because people are looking at news sites to replace them. And moreover, such newspapers as still exist have become increasingly trivialized. I know this because I've benefited enormously from this process down the years, and I've seen it increasingly. And editors, for example, now will not tackle subjects about which they think their readers don't know anything about. And a few years ago, they were particularly interested in such articles. In my lifetime, we've gone from worries about overpopulation to worries about low birth rates. And we don't even, in the West, reproduce ourselves. And whatever reason one puts forward for this development, and more people are living on their own than ever before, our habits have become more solitary and less social. And one of the reasons people don't have children, and I'm not saying it's the whole reason, is that a child implies a commitment beyond one's career and one's personal standard of living, and many people don't want to have that interfered with, and that's a rather selfish point of view. There's a deep sense of entitlement in society, and managers, for example, now find it perfectly normal that they should be paid large multiples of what their staff are paid. And this has increased enormously over the years. They now find the increased multiples perfectly normal. And this sense of entitlement runs through society in all parts of society. And this, of course, makes people extremely demanding. And our political class feels particularly entitled to control of society, though it is very shallow. The political class in Europe particularly, is completely divorced from the population and believes itself entitled to, and we heard this, I think, several times in this conference, to control and to change the fundamental political and economic conditions under which people live without any consultation. Mr. Kohl, for example, pressed on with the introduction of the euro, despite the reluctance and even opposition of his own people to that introduction. And this is an extremely serious problem. And it turned out, I think, that his population was much wiser than he. But there is an arrogance which does not come from depth to this kind of approach. And at much lower levels, populations now believe themselves entitled to things, for example, by running up debt, which will have to be paid for by succeeding generations, including, of course, the younger generation here. And the French call these things les acquis, as if privileges that are once granted can never be lost or removed. So they feel a sense of entitlement. And this is the world into which tomorrow's leaders have been born, in which they will continue to live and consider normal, and which they will lead in the manner that we, my generation, have taught them. Thank you very much.
Now over to the other side of the argument, also from a leader of today, Cam Marston, president of Generational Insights, a firm based in Mobile, Alabama. Cam started it in the 1990s after several years working for Nestle in the USA, where he began to realize just how different people and groups of people actually are. He's a specialist in generational change, which is what he often lectures on to businesses and conferences in many parts of the world. And he's written at least one book about it. Cam Marston is going to oppose the idea that tomorrow's leaders are selfish, shallow, and demanding.
Good afternoon. I want to also thank you for the invitation. I greatly appreciate this. It's a treat to be here, very atypical from anything that I do. So I will oppose the motion by saying there are two components to this argument that I disagree with. First, we've been here before. Throughout history, people have looked at the next generation and said, they are not worth it. They're not worthy. They're not worth it. They don't have what it takes. Secondly, the argument is simply not true. It's simply not true. Let me give you some examples. They're the most educated generation in history, are the leaders of tomorrow. They have much higher voting rates than most generations do. They volunteer more. Moreover, they volunteer at an earlier age than any generation has done in the past. There are 300 million of this generation unemployed today, nearly the size of the United States, the population of the United States. Yet they generally maintain high hopes and positive attitudes for their future. None of this describes a group that is selfish, shallow, and demanding. They believe that the purpose of business is twofold. Number one, to generate a profit, but number two, to create products and services that benefits the society in which they live, in which they participate. Again, none of this is selfish, shallow, and demanding. And let's also state this, that not too long ago, using these technologies, these boxes, these screens that had been referred to a moment ago, the leaders of tomorrow began the Arab Spring, which will be a defining moment in our world history. They did this through the screens. These were the leaders of tomorrow that created this. Every time a generation in our society sees a generation come behind them that pushes back to their value systems, that pushes back to what they believe in, the older generation cites that behavior as selfish, shallow, and demanding. The truth is that older generation probably pushed back at the generation before them, and the generation before them, and the generation before them. There is a very good argument, I believe, that could say this argument that the leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, and demanding is nothing but truly a rite of passage, a life stage that all of us in this room either have gone through or will go through. Every time a generation sees the generation come behind them and say, I want something different, or I think I can do better, or we want something different from this experience here, the senior generation looks at them and calls them lazy, calls them indolent, and starts to call them names because they don't share the same hopes, the same goals, the same definitions of success, perhaps. And it happens over and over and over again. A quote for you. Our youth now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for their elders and love chatter in place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up their food, and tyrannize their teachers. Anybody know where this comes from? Socrates. We've been here before. We've been here before. The leaders of tomorrow have every opportunity in front of them that anyone could want. They are not selfish. They are not lazy. They go out and attack. They find things that they want. They host events like this. They create chatter between generations. They create chatter between different cultures. They have seen what they want, and they are aggressively moving towards it. And there's one more point that needs to be made, and I think I'll finish before my time is up. But there's one point that needs to be made. If you are on the side, and if you are a leader of today, and you are on the side that the leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, and demanding, there are 2 points that I want you to realize. Number one, you created them. This is your fault. All right? These are your children. These are your employees. These are your mentees, whatever it may be. And furthermore, if you believe that the leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, and demanding, and you are a leader of today, what you're essentially saying is, these kids are just like me when I was their age. We've been here before. Thank you.
The pendulum swings back to the proposers, and our first leader of tomorrow, Nayan Agrawal. She's 23, law student at the National Law University in Lucknow in northern India. She's published papers on topics such as discrimination in pay, cyber terrorism, and patent pools and antitrust laws in India. Nayan Agrawal speaks in support of the proposition that the leaders of tomorrow, which she is, are selfish, shallow, and demanding. She's got 6 minutes to do it in.
Thank you, Dr. Day. My opponent said that our generation pushes back their values because we think that they are the values we do not conform to, and that's why our generation calls us selfish. Well, I also call my generation selfish, and I do not think I look old. And my values are many, and so are my reasons. Ladies and gentlemen, the human race as we know it is inherently selfish. And while my seemingly radical beliefs may come across as a huge affront to this gathering, I hope to unfold before you the hidden propensity of growth underlying the virtue of selfishness that has been debunked as a vice on account of our highly conventional perception. When we talk about selfishness, it conjures an image of a brutal man who tramples others to move ahead himself. But the exact meaning of selfishness is concerned with one's own interests, one's own beliefs. And what kind of a human being does not do that? In fact, every leader I can think of has been selfish. With this food for thought, ladies and gentlemen, Mahatma Gandhi was in fact a selfish man. What incited the social revolutionary within Gandhi was not the British excesses on the Indian community, but an insult to his own beliefs, his own interests, when he was thrown off the first class reserved for the British only. Gandhi capitalized on this instinctive selfishness, which transcended itself into what's it often called its purest form, that of selflessness. And that is what, ladies and gentlemen, spurs human action, selfishness. If we move to a more contemporary example, we see that environmental issues were the least of our concerns a few decades back. But then our interest lied in exploiting the resources. As we realized that this is not going to sustain us for long, the clarion call came for the protection of the environment, not because we suddenly became selfless or sharing, but now our interest lies in preserving the environment we think is fast depleting. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it is high time that we shed the hypocrisy we live our lives by and accept selfishness as a meaningful expression of the self. This brings me to think who we perceive as a leader. Amid the chaos that we frequently find ourselves in, we look up to that someone who's quickest to take the baton to help us cope better. The values which are built upon consensus take a long time to deliver. People who wish to remain as leaders or see themselves as one, unfortunately, cannot afford the luxury we live in the world we live in today. I mean, imagine taking 20 years to deliver a result built upon consensus. The heterogeneity of interests would still not be addressed, and if by some miracle the leader does come in a position to deliver, people probably would have moved on to someone who delivered in their interest at the earliest. This sense of urgency is not only leading us to shallowness of information, but is also making us as leaders more comfortable with uncertainty. We all have some set of values, and standing by those values is what makes us a good leader. And a leader has to be demanding of his followers. If a leader is not demanding of his followers, is not pushing them to excel, what right does he have to lead? For example, General Electric CEO Jack Welch was frantically criticized for his 70-20-10 policy. But, ladies and gentlemen, it was this same selfish, demanding man of CEO who multiplied its market capitalization by 27 times and was declared as the CEO of the year by the very same peers and the management legend that the world looks up to today. Do we care that he was the selfish, shallow, demanding man that he was? No. Had he probably been none of those things, we wouldn't know who Jack Welch was, and we probably wouldn't kill to get in his shoes if we ever got an opportunity. And last but not the least, ladies and gentlemen, we are all but humans, and as humans, we are most often told we are social animals. And that is where I rest the basic premise of my argument. As social animals, we have a distinct and ravenous desire to be powerful, followed, applauded, envied, loved, respected, and satisfied. Unfortunately, though, in that very order of preference. There's no denying the fact that there are set goals that we are required to meet every day in our lives, goals which require us to make choices, choices which may not conform to our personal preferences, choices which may not suit our value systems. But ambitious that we all are, we do make those choices and adjust our value systems to the requirements of the world around us. This, ladies and gentlemen, does not make us bad people. It makes us the leader we strive to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Last speaker from the platform, of course, opposes the motion. Ning Wang, 29 years old, Assistant Director at the Futures and Strategy Division of the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Singapore. Also the founder of 2 technology startups specializing in mobile and cloud computing, and he's got a master's degree in management science and engineering from Stanford University in California. Ning Wang is a leader of tomorrow and speaks in favor of them and against the motion.
Thank you very much, everybody, and I'm very pleased to be here. And I'm also very pleased because over the past few days at the symposium, I've had the great opportunity to interact with many of the young leaders of tomorrow who are seated right here in this auditorium. And I must say that I'm truly inspired by what they're doing. And just to name a few, we have someone working in the rural areas of Japan, improving community development so that younger people have a greater sense of belonging. We have someone working in the Himalayan regions, improving the water quality for local people through river conservation projects. We have someone working in Latin America, in South America, pushing for greater transparency within the government. We have people working in Washington, D.C., financing startups to enter the emerging African market to address specific market gaps and market needs. And if this doesn't convince you, and let's look beyond this auditorium and think about the young leaders of tomorrow worldwide. And as Cam has shown us, many studies have shown that more and more young people, more than the other generations at their age, are volunteering their time and effort in nonprofit organizations, in charities. More young people are standing up for things, for causes they believe in, such as environmental conservation, such as addressing social inequality. And increasingly, more and more young people who are working in for-profit businesses are also asking for greater corporate social responsibility, trying to harmonize profit-making and doing greater social good for society. And so, given this context, I think we should look at the younger generation and look at the future with a sense of hope and with a sense of optimism. However, the motion today is very specific. It talks about selfishness, shallowness, and being demanding. And these, ladies and gentlemen, are very specific adjectives. And in English language, they have a very specific connotation, negative connotation on what these people are. It is not a descriptor of what you do. It is the judgment of the values that you have. I believe nobody here is going to proudly declare that I am selfish. Nobody's going to say that simply because it's a negative judgment on your character, on your behavior. And given this, yes, we agree with what the proposition has been talking about, yes, there is no such thing as perfect altruism. Everybody may have that little self-interest in part of us. And if we touch our hearts, I believe we can find that in everybody, in every one of us. However, is that what society means by selfishness? Selfishness is a very harsh criticism on what people do when they further their interests at the expense of others. However, increasingly, more and more young people are trying to strive for a win-win situation in which to maximize collective good as well as their personal interest. And this, by no means, is what society means by selfishness. And if you think about it, let's look at it, think about an analogy. Say a fireman who just rushed into a burning building and saved a little girl. Yes, he has gained some media coverage. He's now a national hero. But we, in no way, will call this person a selfish person. In fact, anything, we will praise him as a selfless person for risking his life for somebody else. So judging by what society views as selfishness, shallowness, and being demanding, we can't accept that saying everybody is selfish simply proves the emotion. And more importantly, we find that, yes, serving your self-interest at times can lead to greater good, but we don't call that selfishness. And more importantly, we find that today the motion is very specific. It talks about a specific group of people, the leaders of tomorrow. And what we heard about was more about whether the nature of human beings is it selfish or not. Sure, that will make another interesting intellectual discussion on the nature of humanity, but today we're looking forward to more in-depth discussion on why we are singling out this unique group of people, the young leaders of tomorrow, and why are we saying that this group of people is so special and so unique such that we want to call them selfish, shallow, and demanding. And on this side of the house, we think that we shouldn't do that. And as Cam has shown you, this is a historical argument and debate that's gone on for thousands of years. And you heard the quote from Socrates. In fact, many people of the ancient times, like Aristotle, Plato, have criticized the younger generation of their times for being just a bunch of slackers. And even in the World War II generation, we find that many of the World War II generation in America were once criticized for lacking the good old American gambling spirit and enterprise. However, later on, it's exactly the same group of people who grew up to become what is known as America's greatest generation of all times. So we find that the society today is very different from what it used to be in the past. Yes, children are spending many hours in front of the televisions, and yes, there's a lot of information out there in the internet. The world we find is very different. And this misunderstanding between the older generation and the younger generation has continued for thousands of years. And we should come to realize that this misunderstanding arises because we look at the same things and interpret them from very different perspectives. And on this side of the house, we believe that we should look at the issues with a more progressive lens and think about it from the young people's perspective because they are the ones inheriting the world, whether it's problematic or not. They are the ones growing up in this new environment. So if we give them a chance and look at it from the unique context that they grow up in, then maybe we can give a chance to the young people and a chance to our future. Thank you.
Wonderful timing. Now it's time to look at the vote, how it went. I think it's going to flash up on the screen. 40%, let's say, agree, 60% disagree. We'll have another take of that at the end of the debate and see whether things have changed very much. Let's go on now to the floor debate. If you want to speak, line up behind those microphones, please, and don't block the view of you at the microphone, where there should be a spotlight on the microphone fairly quickly. And we'll start, I hope, with a proposer.
Well, as I'm closest to the microphone, I just start. And today...
Who are you and where are you?
I'm Markus Schwaninger from this university. And so I deal a lot with the youth. So one of these youthful and famous speakers today came up to me and said, well, the boss of a firm with about 26 billion And he came up to me and said, "You are my teacher." So I was very proud. Now for me, yes, he's one of the leaders of today, isn't he? So, well, I must be a leader of yesterday. and I haven't heard talk about any leader of yesterday, so I'm probably the only one. Now, concerning the leaders of tomorrow, I'm teaching a lot these young people. And, well, I'm teaching them in the upper semesters, and so I have a certain bias. But it would be ridiculous to assume that 100% of the young leaders are selfish, shallow, and demanding. Some will always be. But about the majority, I can say, they are not selfish. They are masters in teamwork, and I think that's enough of an indicator. They are not shallow. They have big analytical depth. And about demanding, yes, they are, and they better be. They want me to be a good teacher.
Not quite sure if you were on the right microphone, but anyway. Somebody from this side now, please. Say who you are and where you're from.
Greetings to all. My name is Nayan Agrawal. I'm from South Africa, studying maritime studies in the UKZN. Having had the proponents of the topic that the leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, and demanding, first of all, I'd just like to congratulate you on a very well-articulated argument. However, across you, Mr. Dalrymple, I have two arguments against you. The first one, you said that the fact that the leaders of tomorrow are desiring less and less children and they do not have time to settle down for families implies that they are selfish. I would like to point out the fact that some of our greatest leaders of yesterday and leaders of today never settled down to make families, but it's not because they were selfish. They were simply too ambitious to have any time for such. The immediate example I can think about is John Maynard Keynes. We economists, we all know John Maynard Keynes and perhaps do have a clue about his background. Secondly, you said that we tend to make too much debt such that it impacts negatively on the future generations, and you said that amounts to selfishness. Again, I disagree on account that the existing institutions today, particularly if you want to see a good life, like drive fancy cars and live in a fancy house, they actually want you to have some amount of credit record so that you can be able to take a mortgage in the future. I have that personal experience. And just in the few seconds that remain, Ms. Nayan Agrawal, your example of Mr. Mahatma Gandhi, it seems that in your definition of selfishness, you accidentally, and I do hope it was only an accident, that you equated his sacred conviction that human race is important and all equal to selfishness, and that is not necessarily true. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the proposition.
Well, hi, my name is Harsh, and I would like to have Cam specially refer to this one. If we can restrict ourselves and remove the value judgment of the word selfish for a while, I find it very difficult to remove the self out of the context of motivation. I personally believe that the opposite of selfish is not selflessness, but indifference, because there are always trade-offs which are involved. Now, what motivates a person to conduct a selfless act, as you said, go out on street, protest, or volunteer, is not selflessness. If we create the mess in our backyard and we go out to clean it, it is not selflessness. There have always been lobbying, and there have always been protests. Today, we have the two things, which is called access and awareness, through which we can mobilize it. And hence, it is more decentralized, and thus more people can participate in a way which is tangible and palpable to the rest of the world. But it has always been happening, just that it was more centralized. Secondly, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, all sensible men are selfish by nature. It is instinctively true. However, the way you're portraying is that we do a lot of things, especially this generation, which is motivated for the commonality, which I find it difficult to digest because competition by nature, forces you to fight with each other for the singular pie. And because wherever there is a zero-sum game, we fight with each other, and win-win situation doesn't exist always. So cooperation, although it's a very, very good quality, goes against the very nature of this game. And our institutions, and more than once, help us fight against each other. In fact, politics is all about that. So I would like you to reflect upon this. Thank you very much.
Against the motion.
Namaste, friends. I'm Atul Mishra from India. My question is to Nayan Agrawal. The characteristic of a leader is, one of the basic is that he has a follower, he or she. And you don't have followers by forcing them. You earn their respect, you earn their trust, you earn the belief that they are for themselves, they are there to look after, and that's how they have followers. Now, I fail to believe how can I trust a person who is demanding, who is shallow, or who is selfish. In fields over the world, whether it is medicine, where we have an example of Marie Curie, we have religions, where we have example of Jesus Christ or Gautam Buddha, or we have leaders, where we have example of Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, or anyone. We have seen they have devoted their entire life for the benefit of mankind. My only question is, would you like to be led by a person who is selfish, demanding, and shallow? Thank you.
Thank you. Next one.
All right. Hello. Hi. Okay. So I'm Olivia, and I just want to. I'm from Cameroon. I have a social business in Cameroon. I just want to make a little disclaimer thing. I think this question, the leaders of tomorrow, are they selfish, demanding, shallow, and demanding, is very important for us leaders of tomorrow to dig into and to be critical about. So I want to throw in this perspective. Okay. So the work I do on the ground. For me, it's, I'm impacting communities, I'm helping youths, I'm empowering young people. But for a lot of people, for my aunts, for my uncles, my parents who invested in my education to go to the US, for me to return and to not have a good job where I'm giving back to my family or where I'm contributing to my family's growth, for them, it could be selfish of me to be following my dream, and this dream that you are applauding, everyone here. But we have to admit at least that could be selfish, right? It's selfish compared to what I could be doing right now, that is splurging on my parents for investing in me and splurging on my community. But I chose actually to go for a cause that I strongly believe in. So I think for leaders of tomorrow, let's be critical to ourselves. And I addressed it to Mr. Wang and Mr. Marston. How would you respond to that, or to that perspective of selfishness of our interests? Thank you.
Yes.
All right. My name is Emil. I come from Copenhagen Business School. I'll make it very brief. It must be a continuum. Of course, we shouldn't be talking extremes. But if it's a continuum, then maybe we are talking in relative terms, so that we are accused now of being selfish, demanding, etc., compared or relative to the previous generations, right? If those of you who were present here today and yesterday at the previous debates may have been following what was going on the tweets and may have been able to compare it to what was being said on the stage. And when you look at the leaders, this term is a bit weird, but the leaders of today and their discourse and what they agree on, and you see what people are talking about up there, the young new generation with their tablets and their smartphones participating in the debate, we are not articulating narrow self-interests. We are talking about system, we are talking about our involvement in mankind and a critical approach to global problems. On the stage, we heard just before this session that the two things that will keep the two global leaders of today awake at night is stagnation in Europe and lack of competitiveness for his own firm. I don't think that is what keeps us alive, and that is not what keeps us tweeting. It's something different. And so there is a discrepancy. Thank you.
Spotlight on you, sir.
Okay, my name is Robert Day, also from UK, but no relation, I believe, to Peter. Yeah, I'm going to be even more simple than Emil's. Actually, this is a couple of days ago. Me and the other leaders of tomorrow were at the event organized by Accenture. And just between a very fascinating lecture on technology and spirituality, it was during the coffee break. And I found myself complaining kind of to myself that there was no coffee during the coffee break. And it is, I've been kind of purposely flippant, but I think we can be guilty of these small sins sometimes. So yeah, that's basically my point. Thank you.
Okay, so about the leaders of tomorrow, I wanted to come up with the question, how come do these leaders emerge? How come do they appear? I think that whenever a person wants to become a leader, he is driven initially by his own ambitions and aims, but whenever he gets the followers, he takes the responsibility for them. If he sacrifices time to teach them, if he sacrifices something to benefit other people, then he becomes a leader. And whenever he loses his followers, whenever he becomes selfish, he just stops being a leader. And we shouldn't consider those people who are demanding and shallow to be a leader, because leader always has followers, and selfish demanding ones they won't have by time, and so history proves that. For example, Mahatma Gandhi, we can say that he is a leader because he sacrificed a lot of things for his nation, you know, and the history proved that he had followers, and he I mean, initially maybe he was driven by his ambitions, but then he became a leader because people started following him because he sacrificed it. This is what I want to say.
Back to the motion.
Hello everyone. My name is Amritansh Nigam, and I represent University of Mumbai. What I say is that let us define a shallow person. So a shallow person is superficial, not bothered about the consequences, jack of all trades, self-indulgent, lacks perspective about things, thinks on very narrow lines. Then who is a selfish person? Someone who prevents you from enjoying something that they themselves have no need for. And then we go for demanding. A person who can ask for something with authority. Now, once we have defined these characteristics, let us understand that these are just tools. These are just tools, and what is more important is the thought behind it. So if a person can serve and use all these characteristics for the benefit of the world, I don't find any issue with that as such. So I might serve the world, I might serve across the waves, and that too on a superficial level, but till the time I'm doing some good for the world, I don't think so there should be an issue. So we should understand that this is just a tools. These three characteristics are just tools, and it is more important as how we use it and how we define the future generations. So I think I would like to end it on a note that the leaders of tomorrow are shallow, selfish, and demanding. And that is the reason they've used these tools to come to the symposium. Thank you very much.
Hi all, my name is Nick, I'm from the Netherlands, and I think it is important that we keep in the back of our mind that we are not talking just about my generation, but we are talking about leaders, the ones that need to have a vision for the future. And if we look back at the past decades, the world has seen enormous growth, and it was largely based on the everlasting wish for more and more, and the demand for more and growth. But as we have seen, we cannot sustain that way, and we have failed to achieve such growth in a sustainable manner. So we need visions for the future. And anyone who upholds and still relates to those values as selfish and shallowness and demanding, per definition, that disqualifies him or herself as a leader of tomorrow. And let me refocus those terms. There has never been a generation who is so interconnected with each other, and therefore never been a generation who has been so aware of the problems, so we are not shallow. Then there has never been a generation that has been so ambitious, and ambitious is not the same as demanding. We want things, we wish for things, but we do not ask anyone to bring them to us. Then the last part, selfishness. We are not selfish, yet we can be individualistic. But the difference is, as somebody before me pointed out, is that selfishness is doing something for yourself, and individualistic is doing something by yourself. Thank you.
In favor.
Hi, I'm Clément from France. I didn't know on which microphone to stand because I don't understand even the link between the three words of the motion. In fact, over the past 3 days, I've been deeply astonished by the generosity of my mates, their demanding reasoning regarding our system, and their willingness to act deeply to change it in a better way. Then, I believe that if we are the leaders of tomorrow, then these leaders are just matching with the last element of the motion. However, I still believe that the situation is deeply stressful because I don't believe that we are at the image of our generation, which is daily manipulated by marketing and consumer society that exacerbates selfish desires because of media also, which are no more challenging their minds with shows intellectually poorest and poorest. And finally, our generation seems just to accept the situation with resignation. This is the role of leaders of today, to educate the next generation, all this generation, to make that us, leaders of tomorrow, will not be separated to our mates by a too important gap that would prevent us from having any significant action on the world, whereas we all agree that we do need it.
Against the motion.
Hello, my name is Brian Sealander. I'm the proud employer of many brilliant millennials. I think that where you stand on this question depends in some respects on where you sit on the level of digital atheists, digital immigrants, or digital natives. So there are people, digital atheists, that believe that modern technology has had no real value and is something that we can deny the existence of. There's digital immigrants, my generation, I'm 36 and older, who grew up in an analog world but learned to adopt and respect these technologies. And then there's people sort of 29 and younger that have grown up knowing nothing other than instant access to information at any given moment. So the question of selfish, there was a debate yesterday about whether Facebook and Twitter are inherently narcissistic and selfish experiences. If you're not familiar with them and you didn't grow up with them as part of it, you may think that the cultivation of a personality online is in fact a uniquely selfish experience, when in fact the goal of these platforms is to create deeper and more profound personal connections with others. You don't create, if you're a digital native, a Facebook profile simply to talk about yourselves. You do it to build relationships with those around you. If you think about shallow, if you grow up in a world where you can literally find anything you want to know about anything within a few clicks, then you do not necessarily have the depth of knowledge in one or two subjects that you may have had generations beforehand, but you do know more about more things. So you are, in some ways, a shallow generalist, but you are also an accumulator of greater knowledge. And if you've grown up as a digital native and not a digital immigrant, and you're used to being able to have, like I said, the answer to any question done immediately, then you tend to demand that same speed of result in every aspect of your life. So as you think about where you stand on this, I would challenge people to move your own perspective from that of digital atheist to digital immigrant to digital native, and seeing if that changes your answer as how you think about the question.
For the motion.
Great, thank you. My name's Niraj. I'm an MBA student at London Business School. I want to make 2 points about demanding and being shallow. I agree with all the rhetoric about history. What I want to say is that this generation is living in a generation where our desires are satisfied more instantaneously than any other generation before. And what that means is that we've got a culture of instant sense gratification, and that makes us more demanding. And we've become extremely impatient. If we don't like something, we change it. If the world around us doesn't suit us, we change it. And that happens with small things, but it's starting to happen with bigger things. The previous generations had much more loyalty towards their career. In this generation, it's a responsibility of the career, of our job, of the partners, of our friends around us to make us happy. It's no longer our responsibility. We've outsourced that completely. So if I don't like my job, I change it within 3 years. If I don't like my partner, I change it within 3 years. If I don't like the world around me, I start to change it. The notions of patience, loyalty have completely dissipated and are starting to dissipate even quicker further. I want to make the second point about shallowness. Shallowness is about, we are increasingly shallow. Knowing a lot about a lot of things does not make us deep people. We are inherently shallow. We know a lot about a lot of useless things. Sorry, we know very little about a lot of useless things. But despite our education, despite our training, and this echoes a point that one of my Australian friends made yesterday about how we're using our intellect to become deeper, to ask questions about why. We're asking a lot of questions about how the world around us exists. But we're not asking questions about why we exist, who we are, despite the fact that we have more education, more training than we ever had before in any other generation. So they're the 2 points that I wanted to make on shallow and demanding. Thank you.
Against the motion.
Hello, my name is John. I'm a law student from the United States. I switched cues because I'm somewhat uncertain about how I feel about this. I think there's cause for...
there's no microphone in the middle.
So I chose to let my optimism win out over my cynicism. So the reason I was cynical at first is I've heard so much idealism here today from all these young people. And yet, and how unpopular the banking panel was. Many people were talking about it at the coffee break. And yet the poll that was showed this morning shows that the majority of these students want to go into banking. It takes a certain level of cynicism to feel that banking is evil and still be interested in entering that profession. And that's why I'm cynical, but I'm also optimistic. And that's why I switched cues. I've seen so much courage. I've seen so many interesting people doing so many interesting things that I think there is reason to be optimistic for the future, that our leaders will not be selfish, shallow, and demanding. And I think the punchline here is it's a matter of individual responsibility of whose leadership our generation will accept, because whether the leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, or demanding can't be determined today. They're not leading yet today. But the leaders of tomorrow, it's an issue of personal responsibility in whose leadership we will accept. And if we are courageous, if we do demand excellence, selflessness, depth from our leaders, then I think we have the ability to sway this towards the leaders of tomorrow being the kinds of leaders that we need.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start my thoughts with a quotation from Dr. Miles Monroe. He says that where purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. What I'd like to say is that our youth do not know they don't have a sense of purpose, a true sense of who they are. What we have been questioning throughout the symposium is that we are engaging in all this global dialogue. We are engaging in all these problems that we volunteer, we go and do things, but do we really know who we are? This has been the question that has been posed. And so we are selfish. Let me tell you why we become selfish. We become selfish because there are so many million possibilities in the world. And in this million and in this myriad of choices, we need to come back to the self to say, well, in this thing, who am I and what do I need? And so once you ask the question, who am I need to come to the I, myself, and I, so that I can be able to appropriate what my vision is, what my existence stands for. And therefore, I can maybe start an organization and go for that cause which I stand for. And that may be perceived as selfish. And the other thing that I have realized, ladies and gentlemen, is on the issue of shallowness. Are we shallow? The biggest question that we need to ask ourselves is that, do we have enough role models? Do we have enough mentors in our generation that can be able to give us the positive nuggets, the wisdom that we need? So yes, we are shallow. You know why? Because we are lacking those positive role models in our community today, in our societies. And so we become then demanding because nobody has told us and has taught us the right etiquette in some instances. And I would like to rest my case here, that we need to find first our purpose, and we need those right role models so that we may perhaps, turn the tide around. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Against.
Hi, I'm Shiladitya. I'm doing my MBA in India. First of all, I would like to point out that the people sitting in here, the young leaders of tomorrow who are attending the symposium, are not a representation of the entire young leaders of tomorrow. The young leaders of tomorrow who are out there working while we are wasting time here, probably attending talks, they are the ones who are making a difference. Curiosity is not shallowness. Shallowness is something where you have half knowledge. We are inherently curious. And having knowledge about various other things does not mean that we are not subject matter experts in the fields that we are working in. To Nayan Agrawal, I need to address a point that you had about your premise of basic values of human beings. I don't think that it's as simple as that in today's modern world. We are operating at a much more complex level, and hence, you cannot say that the inherent quality of a human being is being selfish. There are people I know personally, and I've met one in the morning who is 37 years of age and is running the fastest growing low-cost airlines probably in the world, who is constantly addressing the point of not being selfish, egoistic, and trying to convey that message through his organization. And that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
I'm afraid my watch tells me we have room for only one speaker more on each side, so you, sir, first.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Sam Johnson and I'm from New Zealand. And I'd like to argue that, yes, Generation Y are selfish, demanding and shallow, and I'm very proudly selfish, demanding and shallow for the world that I want to live in 50 years' time and the world that I want my children to live in 100 years' time. It's well established that change happens from the grassroots. It's well established by politicians, by leaders all around the world, in business and in the private and public sector, that true change happens when the grassroots communities demand it, and they demand and vote with their feet. It's well established as well that we are a group of extremely articulate people in this room who are generally very intelligent, and I've never really been in a group of particularly young people, and I can consider us all young people in this room. It doesn't matter whether you're a leader of tomorrow or a leader of today. We are able to be articulate, and we are able to show our courage for the world we want to live in. Our challenge is to encourage more people, more young people, to stand up and be selfish, demanding and shallow, to cause the changes that this world needs for us to survive and for the planet to survive in 50 and 100 years' time, and the rest. Thank you.
Last floor speaker, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leonardo, representing Indonesia and Leaders of Tomorrow. I have two notions that I want to bring. The first is about relativity, and second is about the exact topic, which is about leaders, not just our generation in general, but the leaders. Let me start with the first one. Is there anyone in this room, if I may ask you, that never shown, being selfish, shallow, and demanding? Never in any case. Is there anyone? Never in any case shows those three things. There's no one. Yeah. So when we talk about these three things, we must see the relative value. Every one of us has shown these three things. But is it the majority of the attitude that we show? The behavior that we show? Is it or not? Because if it is the majority, we are mainly selfish, mainly shallow, mainly demanding, then honestly, we are not a leader. If we are a leader, that comes with it the qualities, some qualities that includes, of course, some not being selfish in the majority, not being shallow in the majority, and not being demanding. Well, that one is more arguable. So the first one is about relativity, and the second one is about leaders. So if we are not a leader, then probably those three things are dominating most of our attitude. But if you're a leader, then it's inherent in us that we shall not show those three things in the majority of our time. Therefore, I want to close with this. If we are a leader, we might have selfishness, shallowness, and being demanding in some of the ways, but it's not majority of who we are. Majority of who we are, we show the qualities that against those three things. So those are my proposition to say that we, the leaders of tomorrow, are not selfish, are not shallow, and are not demanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant timekeeping there. Admirable. Now, we'll have another vote, I think. The leaders of tomorrow are selfish, shallow, and demanding. That's the proposition. Those in favor, those against. Please do your voting. And we'll come back to that right at the end with the result. But now we've got the Time to wrap up, a chance for the teams to answer their critics and clinch the argument. 2 minutes each at this stage, starting with Cam Marston, who's still opposing the motion.
Still opposing the motion. Leadership. Number of questions occurred over what does this mean? How is it defined? And there are as many definitions as there are people that use the word. But let's take one example. Here's a definition of leadership that I'm quite fond of. What have I done to make the world a better place for my children? What have I done to make the world a better place for the next generation? You can do it with your own hands, your own back, through your teams that you represent. But there's a good definition of leadership that we could adopt. In my opinion, the leaders of tomorrow are actively engaged in making the world a better place for the next generation, even though most of them don't even have that generation yet. They're not yet there. The leaders of tomorrow in this room, I'm supposing most of them aren't parents, yet they have a dream, they have a goal, they have a plan for making the world a better place for their children. Frankly, and since courage is one of the key contents of this conference, I will say this. I'm not sure the leaders of today can make that same boast. I'm not sure how the leaders of today would answer the question, how have you made the world a better place for your children? They can very clearly say what they've done for themselves and their peers and how well they've kept up the status quo, but I'm not sure they can lay a claim to have made the world a better place for their children. But in the actions, in the behaviors, in the volume, and in the passion that I hear from the leaders of tomorrow who have stepped up to the microphone, they seem to have a plan. They seem to have a direction that way. However, to almost contradict myself, 20 years from now, the leaders of tomorrow who are in this room may come back. Let's assume it's a reunion of some sort. The leaders of tomorrow will be here 20 years, and they'll be sitting in the chairs out there. And they, if they're like normal, and like the point that I made when I opened, the leaders of today in 20 years will be gathered in this room bitching about the youth. They always do. They always do. So the measuring point, what have you done to make the world a better place for our kids? And I think if you, a great quote, and I wish I knew the attribution, we don't own the world. We borrow it from our children. And I think the leaders of tomorrow seem to get that much more so than the leaders of today do, frankly. Thank you.
Now, Theodore Dalrymple, supporting the motion, of course.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, just because things have been said before doesn't mean to say that they're not true. And I can say that I am a member of a generation, 1968 generation, which was said to be extremely idealistic. And it has actually produced the world in which you, the younger people, will now find yourself picking up the pieces. And some of the most selfish people turned out to be the people who were claiming in 1968 to be building a new world from their idealism. And I can remember it, and I can assure you they were not really idealistic. And if we take the point that we always say the same thing, I refer you to a book called Memorials of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. It was written in 1844, and it was about financial crises. And I can assure you that the present crisis would make a very good extra chapter. So merely because things have been said before doesn't make them untrue today. And it is not part of my case that people are uniquely, leaders of tomorrow, are uniquely selfish or shallow or anything like that. What I'm saying is that you're inheriting a world, which my generation has contributed very largely to make, that will force these characteristics upon you. And there are certain things that aid it. We've heard about instant gratification. Instant gratification is not a characteristic of deep people. And we've heard that information is not the same as wisdom. In fact, often information without a sense of perspective, particularly a historical perspective, and I think there is evidence that people are increasingly disconnected from history, information in an absence of perspective is just a higher form of ignorance. So, and we've heard of such things as the Arab Spring. It's far too early to say what the consequences of the Arab Spring are, and they could easily be horrible. And I believe that, I'm no expert, but I believe that in certain respects, things are much worse in Egypt now than they were before from the point of view of liberal democracy. So I think we're not arguing that you're terrible people or any generation is worse than another, but that that this is this selfishness and shallowness has occurred before, and there are reasons for thinking that you will turn out to be shallow and selfish, as my generation has turned out to be shallow and selfish. Thank you.
Now, here's Ning Wang still opposing the motion.
Thank you very much. What has happened before may still be true today, yes. But however, if we go along that logic, I think we're all in quite deep shit. From the times of Aristotle, from Plato, from Socrates, with all the criticisms generation after generation, I would like to think that our society, even though we do have new problems today, our society has progressed over the years to where we are today, and we should be optimistic and look for the future because we think our young generation of leaders will rise up to the challenges and make the world a better place. So in this case, we find that the key question that we keep on hearing is essentially, what do we mean by leaders? What do we understand by that? Is a leader someone who is motivated purely by self-interests? Most certainly not. We wouldn't call that person a leader. And to the lady who is running a social enterprise in Africa, I mean, yes, you're doing something great for the people, and I'm sure the people who have benefited are thanking you for it. And yes, your career has taken you away from your family and friends. And you may think that they may see that as a selfish move, but I would like to believe that your family and friends will understand that what you're fighting for, what you're working for, is to a greater cause, and they will come to terms with your career. So let's not be stopped by that thought that maybe we're selfish, but rather look at the environment that the young people have grown up in. And I think people have been very insightful to point out that there have been a lot of changes in the world. Technological advancements, social changes, environmental changes, and so on and so forth. And this has led to new behavior, like instantaneous gratification, loyalty to career, and so on and so forth. But let's not stop there. The new environment not only breeds new behavior, but it should also evolve the perspectives that we take when we evaluate people's behaviors. And in this world, the world is moving much faster than before, and the young people simply can't function at the same pace, at the same rate that the world used to be. And that's why we see people doing things faster. Young people appear to be impatient. But this is more of a perception issue, a way how we approach it, the way how we look at it. So with this, I'd like to agree with Sam, who said that we should encourage people to make a change. So whichever side that you pick, let's make a difference, but not through being selfish, shallow, or demanding, but by doing the exact opposite. Thank you.
Finally, Nayan Agrawal supporting the motion.
There were several questions directed at me, so I think I would address them first. First, I would like to address the gentleman who spoke first. I said Gandhi was a selfish man, and I very meant what I said. And I further said that he channelized into doing something good for the society, but I think maybe you missed the point. Secondly, we have failed to understand the meaning of selfishness. It is something that is inherent in us, and it is something that is very subjective to every individual. I think it is all about channelizing that selfishness. We can either do it as Gandhi did, or we can either do it as Hitler did. But it is all about how you channelize that inherent quality in you. Thirdly, the comment on shallowness of information. Shallowness of information is leading to shallowness of ideology. There are so many examples where we see that the youth does not stand by the ideology because they believe in it, but they stand by the ideologies in which others believe in it with them. And before I take my seat, I would like a quick show of hands by the leaders of tomorrow, who all of them actually think that they are selfless. Yes, not many, so I think maybe the motion stands. Thank you.
She's ambushed the voting system, but let's see, it should be up by now. Oh, 30% agree with the motion, 70% disagree with the motion. You selfless things. Thank you very much, everyone. That was terrific. Thank you very much indeed, panel.